hundreds, if not thousands, of small skiffs and boats. The first time that we see unconventional naval warfare being used at that scale. And in this gray zone, this is where the IRGC really flourishes. The Islamic Republic of Iran is created as a network state. It's very uncommon in terms of the setup of both their security sector, but also generally how the entire country is set up. So you have a formal state with formal institutions where they have a formal military, and then you have the informal, more ideological state that is tied to the Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC. And the IRGC retains parallel institutions across governance and statecraft, including a parallel military. And the IRGC over the last nearly 50 years has become a state within the state. And that state within the state is very network-centric. It's decentralized. The approach that they're taking is fundamentally different to how militaries operate. Conventional militaries operate like a pyramid, like a hierarchy, where there's clear top-down dynamics, while the IRGC operates more like a flat hierarchy, more like a heterarchy, more like a network, where there are different hubs that operate with degrees of autonomy across a different space. I think the easiest way to explain and understand how Iran operates is looking at Iran as a militia with a state, to the IRGC being like a militia. It's organized more like a non-state actor than it is organized like a conventional military. And the IRGC network in itself as taking a doctrine and adopted a doctrine that we usually know from terrorist organizations, from insurgency groups, that is built towards sustaining pressure indefinitely and coercion, and build around the narrative of resistance, which is one of sustaining pressure and also being able to bounce back under pressure, and takes a more asymmetric approach to warfare, which means they can sustain pressure from conventional militaries and conventional superior militaries in particular. And the way that Iran has set up the IRGC Navy, which exists next to the conventional Iranian Navy, is very much like how a non-state actor or a militia would organize a navy. And that navy is focused upon sustaining pressure. It's focused on resisting pressure from superior navies, and being able to retain resilience despite the fact that they don't necessarily have the latest kit, the latest technology, and certainly in overall numbers might not have the same firepower as, for example, the US Navy, or even many of the navies of the Gulf states, the Arab Gulf states on the other side of the Gulf. The key flaw in the overall Israeli-US strategy towards Iran has been misconceiving Iran as just a normal general authoritarian dictatorship. Yes, it is a military dictatorship, but it's one that's run by this IRGC network in itself. And most of the metrics of success for the Americans and the Israelis was about how much conventional military capability they have destroyed. And they've been quite obsessed with the destruction of the conventional Iranian Navy, which is kind of a relic of the past, considering that the Iranian Navy has been under immense sanctions for decades. It is basically a 1950s, 1960s Navy that cannot even compete conventionally with other conventional navies in the area, including the Gulf states' navies. And the problem that the Americans have had is they have always obsessed about how many vessels they've destroyed from the conventional navy, and have completely disregarded the fact that actually Iran's maritime power, naval power, doesn't sit in the conventional navy, but sits within the IRGC's very decentralized mosquito navy, if you will, the swarms of navy, where they have hundreds, if not thousands, of small skiffs and boats and platforms that they use in an asymmetric, unconventional way, which are very, very difficult to destroy. So similar to their land-based, militia-based sort of operations, which is also about decentralization and dispersion, which is fundamentally different to how conventional militaries operate. Conventional militaries try to concentrate power, and militias try to decentralize and disperse across the battlefield. The same the IRGC Navy is trying to do, where conventional navies are trying to concentrate firepower, the IRGC is trying to decentralize firepower and create a lot of smaller platforms that are widely dispersed across the maritime battle space, And what they're trying to do here is trying to create a variety of different targets that are very difficult to take out individually and very costly to take out. Each of the individual platforms, and that, I mean, we have to really look at the mosquito fleet as not just normal sort of small boats and skiffs, but also mines, some of them being very conventional old school mines. Some of them are more sophisticated mines, naval mines, but they also have a lot of drones, under surface maritime drones that operate as submarines, basically by remote control, are unmanned and operate across, a battle space, are very difficult to detect, same as the mines, very difficult to detect. And if you look at the small boats that they're using, they don't usually have clear markings on them. A lot of the boats that the IRGC is using, or vessels, are vessels that look like conventional trading vessels or cargo vessels that look civilian in character, but actually have a clear military sort of function. And the problem with that is it's what we call in military terms perfidy. The idea that you can blend in a civilian space, which is what the maritime space is, and kind of try to disappear. Well, in essence, you're a bit like a Trojan horse, because some of these vessels seem to be, they have the same profile as a civilian vessel, but are actually used for military purposes. And so what you end up having is a battle space that's extremely wide, complex, with a variety of different platforms, of which many of these platforms can appear on various parts of the battle space at the same time, are difficult to detect and very costly to take out. So if you're a conventional navy and you're trying to take out a small skiff, a small boat, or a small platform that might cost the Iranians a few $10,000 to produce, but you need to use munitions against it, which might cost you $1 million, then you actually have an asymmetry here, where you have to think as a conventional navy whether you actually want to engage each of these skiffs using very expensive sort of kit. And more than that, conventional navies have very expensive, very slow sort of platforms that are not as agile as the small boats that the Iranians or the IRGC are using. So to pursue them, it's going to be very difficult. And if you only have, let's say, 6 big platforms as a conventional navy in that space, and you're up against hundreds, swarms of hundreds of different vessels and platforms, you'll have to make a choice which one to engage. And it's extremely difficult because you're being effectively outnumbered. And it's the same thing, a single mosquito is usually not going to hurt you. But if you're up against a swarm of mosquitoes, despite the fact that they're very small in mass, they're able to overwhelm a much bigger body. And that's sort of the idea that the IRGC Navy has, is you use numbers to kind of confuse the enemy, to overwhelm the enemy's systems, radars, and also the ability of conventional navies to actually attack all these different platforms at the same time. Now, the IRGC in general has been obsessed with the United States. Ever since 1979, when the Islamic Republic was founded, the prime enemy, the number one enemy, was the United States, and by extension also Israel. And they were obsessed. Everything they have come up with, every sort of doctrine and sort of particular way of warfare that they've come up with, has been engineered towards countering an American threat. And so also in the naval space, it's primarily obviously about fighting conventional navies. But the number one conventional naval threat that Iran has been obsessing about was the American naval threat. And then also by extension, the Gulf naval threat, because the Gulf navies also have conventional capabilities. But primarily it was engineered to overwhelm a far more superior, technologically superior conventional US Navy. I think the threat from the IRGC Navy is obviously multifold. The problem has been for years, that before this war has turned hot, has been the fact that the IRGC is using vessels for all kinds of operations. So, in 2019, we had a bit of a tanker war in the Gulf of Oman, as well as in the Persian Gulf, where we've seen tankers going up in flames. And we suspect the IRGC was behind it, and they used civilian boats to get very close to these vessels and then kind of attach some mines onto these ships. So the fact that they can operate in disguise, the fact that the IRGC can use these platforms for smuggling, as well as smuggling of arms, oil, to bypass sanctions, makes that an extremely powerful threat also in peacetime. And where we're going right now in this conflict is we're somewhere in the gray zone between war and peace. So the war has officially finished with a ceasefire, but the ceasefire is not really holding. So we're not in a state of peace. And in this gray zone, this is where the IRGC really flourishes. The IRGC platforms are all engineered to operate with plausible deniability in a battle space where there isn't real war and there isn't real peace. And so the fact that they can blend in, I think, is probably the greatest threat. But when it comes to a hot war, I think what is the IRGC's greatest asset is the fact that they come in numbers and swarms can actually overwhelm the conventional defenses that the Gulf states and the US have built up in the Gulf. I would say it's probably the first time that we see unconventional naval warfare being used at that scale by a state onto another state. Because, mind you, the US is fighting against Iran. This is a state on state conflict. And we have here a state actor like Iran using the tactics of a militia or a non state actor. So, obviously, we've seen the Houthis, for example, which is a Iran funded militia in Yemen. They've used unconventional naval tactics in Yemen and offshore of the shores of Yemen, which in many ways as looks like the sort of tactics that pirates use as well. But the Houthis are not a state actor. Iran is a state, and it's using kind of non-state actor tactics, and that is kind of novel because what is dangerous here is that the IRGC is not just some underfunded guerrilla or insurgency group. It's a very powerful, quite well endowed financially state with billions of dollars behind it, with a massive oil and gas industry behind it. And hence why the IRGC, being a militia with a state, makes it far more potent and far more difficult to fight than any of the non-state actors that we have conventionally fought over the last couple of decades.